Let me introduce Dr. Patrick Lamson Hall. He is research lead of the urban expansion and the periphery project at Africa Urban Lab. He's also the co-founder and principal urban planner at Fitted Project. He leads urban planning and urban expansion efforts in over 30 cities all over Africa, as well as his work in Latin America and the Caribbean and North America, of course. He's a globally recognized expert on urban growth and density, and he has cooperated with organizations from all over the world, including the World Bank, Habitat, and OECD. Without further ado, Dr. Patrick, we can start.
"13 minutes. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I hope you had your lunch. I'm going to talk today about this idea of urban expansion planning. For those of you who've seen me present before, you know that I only have one presentation. This is because I think repetition is important in development. Urban expansion planning is a very simple idea that cities across Africa are now starting to use to structure their urban growth, their future urban growth, their peripheral growth. And it emerged from some academic research that I was involved in at New York University. It's the brainchild of Professor Shlomo Angel at NYU. And the key observation, something that we all know, is that there's very rapid urban growth in Africa. Many people are moving to cities in Africa. There's an urbanization trend. You've probably heard it 7 times today already. This is being driven by migration. People are moving to cities as well as being born in cities, but the shift from a predominantly rural population to a predominantly urban population involves rural to urban migration. So there are newcomers who don't have urban experience coming into cities. And as cities increase in population, there's an increase in the demand for land. So an increase in population leads to an increase in the spatial area of the city. We did a study at NYU of a global sample of 200 cities, and we found that on average, not only in Africa but worldwide, when the population of a city doubles, the area of the city typically triples. You can see that on display here in Accra, Ghana. Between 1991 and 2014, the population increased 3.4-fold, the area increased 6.1-fold. Largely, this is a result of this statistic. The people who are coming to cities, the population that's being added to cities, is by and large, 3/4 ending up in areas of peripheral growth, in areas of urban expansion. Only about 1/4, on average, settles within the existing area of the city through densification. And, we can kind of cry about this and say it would be so nice if our cities were compact and dense, but this actually is a result of a market reality, which is that newly formed households that have lower incomes, people who are moving to cities that have less market power, need to settle in places where they can afford to access land and housing. And by and large, that's on the periphery of the cities. That's where land is affordable, that's where land is accessible. Unfortunately, very little is being done to prepare these areas for growth. The majority of the residential growth in sub-Saharan Africa is informal, and it happens through what we call an atomistic process, like the one that you can see here on the right in Lusaka, not picking on Lusaka in particular, but an area that in 2004 was mostly rural, by 2020 becomes mostly urban. And it happens through an ad hoc process of landowners subdividing their parcels, people putting in backyard units. And this process, by and large, works in the sense that people who need housing that's within the metropolitan labor market are able to obtain it through this process. But what's missing is any public sector intervention to structure this land for urban growth. So it doesn't have the backbone of infrastructure that usually is needed for an orderly urban transition. By the way, I didn't set a timer, so I'll keep my eyes open for the 5-minute thing. How am I doing? 3 minutes in. Okay, great. So the challenge is, if you don't do this kind of planning in advance, it's very expensive. These neighborhoods that are being built on the peripheries of cities with no services, with no plan, we know from Latin America, where a similar process happened a generation ago, eventually these areas will be retrofitted. Services will be brought in, people will get title, conditions will improve. But if you do it without planning, it's much more costly than if you do it with planning. So what does that mean in practice? It means the process of getting these people drinking water, electricity, tenure security is going to be slower. So rather than having, like every urbanizing society in history, rather than having one generation living in poverty during the urban transition, you maybe have 2 generations or 3. And urbanization doesn't work as well as a mechanism for uplift. Urban expansion planning, as I said, is a response to this. And it's a response that attempts to be contextually appropriate, something that recognizes that capacity is limited, recognizes that resources are limited, recognizes that it's a problem at a great scale. Large amounts of land need to be planned in a very short time. And I said this already, but you can imagine how much easier it is to do things proactively, like in the image on the right, where you open a road before development happens, than it is to do it the way it's shown on the left, where you're opening up a road through an existing area. So that's what urban expansion planning is about. It's a proactive plan for the urban edge of the city. And by the way, we're now joined by His Excellency, the former mayor of Nairobi, Joe Akech, who is leading our Kenya urban expansion initiative. So thank you very much for joining us, sir. The foundational piece of infrastructure that will not be produced by the market, but that is necessary to have orderly development, is the arterial road. And the arterial road essentially is a corridor of land between 20 and 30 meters wide, can be wider, that structures the periphery of the city. Urban expansion planning focuses on producing arterial road grids like these, spaced roughly 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer, again, 30-meter wide corridors. Those corridors can carry public transportation, they can carry trunk infrastructure, electricity, water, sewage, and importantly, it means that the periphery of the city is integrated with the existing area and can form one labor market, so people can find jobs and housing. Also, you open some roads early, you can create stronger rural-urban linkages. There are lots of precedents for this. It's not a new idea. New York did it in 1811, Barcelona did it, Havana did it, Berlin did it. I mean, there are lots of cities around the world that have attempted the idea of structured, gridded long-term planning. And we know that it works. We know that it can actually happen on the ground. So what does it look like when we're talking about Africa? This is the view from an urban expansion area in the city of Bahir Dar. I'm on a 3-story mixed-use building that's under construction. When I take the picture, this is a neighborhood that's about 2 years old. Right now, today, it's got a couple, maybe 100,000 people living in it, say like 25,000 houses. The basic plan that is implemented with urban expansion planning is a 5-step program. So first, we anticipate how much growth is likely to happen in the next 30 years, then identify an expansion area, identify places where growth shouldn't go, plan that area, and protect it. So, predicting. We train city urban expansion planning teams in how to estimate how much land the city will need for the next 30 years of growth. What comes out of that process is a number. That number tells you how much land the city needs to control if it's going to have a plan that encompasses its entire growth area. So next we look at the administrative boundaries of the city to say, does the city actually control enough land to make a plan like this? Or is there a need for interjurisdictional, intergovernmental cooperation? Sometimes the answer is no, like in Arua, Uganda, they have plenty of land. It's a massive area. Sometimes the answer is yes. This is Mekelle, Ethiopia, and they needed to expand their boundaries. So this was their original boundary, and this was their expansion boundary. After that, we identify the places where growth shouldn't go. So that's major environmental reserves, things that are needed for hydrological management, areas of high risk, and we lay those out on the map. And then we make a plan of these 30-meter wide roads organized into a network with 4-way intersections, ideally, covering the entire expansion area. And the logic here is you can use these roads as well to guide development away from the high-risk areas. So it's one thing to say, look, you can't build in this national park. It's another thing to say, you can't build in this national park, but here's a piece of land over here that's equally accessible that you can build in. So it takes some pressure off of those high-risk zones. Next, once the plan is made, protect the land. So it's not enough to just make the plan on paper. You have to make sure that development doesn't happen in those road corridors. You don't want people to build in these 30-meter wide strips of road. And because we're talking about a 30-year-long plan, that means that you have to take some measures to protect that land. Now, the best way that we've come up with to do this is a kind of a bottom-up approach, working with local community members. So the political leadership, the people who actually make the plan and approve it, go down on the ground, kilometer by kilometer, and negotiate the specific route with the households that are along the corridor. Then they mark it, and then as fast as they can, they open the roads in a very, very, very simple way. They open the roads by dragging a grader so that the roads are open, and then plant trees or put markers along the edges. So rather than relying on the governance apparatus, the planning apparatus to protect these roads, which we know doesn't work, you create a fact on the ground in agreement with the community to get the roads open. And then you upgrade them over time. This is the basic methodology. And this is what it looks like in practice. This is the city of Bahir Dar, Ethiopia in 2015, 2016, 2018, 2020, 2022, and 2024. And by 2024, you can see where they reserved the land for the arterial roads. They've opened these roads up, and what they did in this part of Bahir Dar is kind of interesting because they didn't only focus on housing. You know, they did some housing development here. They used this land to relieve a land supply bottleneck in their economic development process, and they created a local industry park with no incentives, you know, no extended infrastructure, just land for industrial development. And they found that in their city, there were a lot of firms where if land was easily available and well connected, they would expand and build new facilities. Now, something to keep in mind, this isn't the only part of their urban expansion plan. There's the part I showed you in the picture earlier. They're doing this on all sides in all directions. So the city grows outward evenly, and some of it's residential and some of it's commercial. Some of it includes large parks, but it's an integrated development process. So right now, these are the places that have done it or are doing it, not yet updated to include Kenya, I might add. We have projects that are underway in Somaliland, not Somalia necessarily, Sudan, Uganda, DRC, and a lot in Ethiopia. It started in Ethiopia. Okay, 1 minute. It started in Ethiopia, and many of these have actually been fully implemented on the ground. Our success rate so far, providing technical support to cities to implement this, is about 8 out of 30 that have implemented it to a degree where we can see it on Google Earth. So, you know, not quite 30%, coming up on 30%. And we conducted a study in some of these cities that have actually done it to see what the impacts were on households. And after controlling for some important covariates like education and the number of people working in the household and your previous household income, we found that this approach, households in planned urban expansion areas, as opposed to unplanned areas of growth, had incomes that were 9.4 to 19.4% higher. They were 14% more likely to operate a home business and 15% more likely to use either a taxi bus or a Bajaj to travel to their place of work. So it resulted in real differences in how households are interacting with the metropolitan economy. And we also did a qualitative study of city leaders who reported that it was beneficial for them as well. So thank you very much, and I think that's my 13 minutes. Good. Thank you.